Dr. Rudy Cashman, the Medical Wellness Director at Lutheran Hospital. I have two wonderful guests with me tonight. Dr. DeSantis, an endocrinologist, and Dr. Kathy Paleo, a specialist also in diabetes. And purpose of this show tonight, frankly, is because of this world epidemic of diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes. And this team, the three of us, and also Dr. Karras at Lutheran Hospital, we are convinced that a lot of diabetes, maybe 90% of it, frankly, is preventable, stoppable, treatable, and reversible. And tonight's show is frankly about that. And the information we'll be giving you, you may not know. I really speak to anyone who knows when they have type 2 diabetes that it's 90% of the time you can get rid of it. And we will teach you how to do it. So there's good news out here tonight. So let's define diabetes a little bit. And we'll start with Dr. Paleo explaining to us type 1 diabetes, which is what 10% of diabetes? 10%. Explain that to us, the incidence a little bit and treatment.
Type 1 diabetes is when the body's immune system attacks the pancreas cells that make insulin. It could occur at any age. It used to be called juvenile diabetes because mostly we found it in children, but it can occur in any age. And it's where the people have to give insulin injections because their pancreas no longer makes insulin.
It was life-saving, really. I mean, it was Banting best came up with insulin 1920 or so. And before that time, people were just wasting away and dying,
starving
from the disease. And a lot of adults now have type 1 diabetes too, don't they?
Correct.
Because their pancreas wears out from secreting too much insulin. I'm going to Dr. DeSantis, have you explained type 2 diabetes and lead to the reason why they become type 1? What's type 2 diabetes?
So type 2 diabetes is primarily a disease of insulin resistance. And what happens is over time through poor diet or sedentary lifestyle, people tend to gain weight. They become obese, and there's defects in insulin signaling. And so then the pancreas tries to make more and more insulin in order to keep up with the demand for the rising blood sugars. And then eventually, later on, the pancreas cannot secrete any more insulin. And so they become like a type 1 diabetic. It's not an autoimmune process, but it's just the fact that the pancreas just can no longer put out that much insulin to keep up with the demand.
Yeah, and it's frankly, it's a plague in this country, isn't it? And now it's occurring throughout the world. I'm reading it's in South Vietnam, Korea, in Asia, Saudi Arabia, Europe, and most of these patients have something called metabolic syndrome, don't they? Which, I mean, what's metabolic syndrome? Even some people of normal weight can have this and don't know they have it. I know insulin resistance is where the insulin cannot push the sugar into the cell, mainly because the triglycerides are high, obstructing these receptors. The insulin cannot open the door into the cell. That's insulin resistance. Dr. Atkins, in his book, A Diet I Don't Necessarily Recommend Particularly, but I've read so many eating books, diet books, that they all got some good thing in it. And the way Dr. Atkins describes it is the 5 stages of diabetes. You already mentioned it, insulin resistance, where the insulin cannot get the sugar in the cell, it's resistant. Then after that, the insulin level in the blood is up, but your blood sugar is still normal. That's stage 2 diabetes. Insulin resistance being 1. Stage 3 is where it's going up and down. Then stage 4 is type 2 diabetes. But you must agree, Dr. DeSantis and Kathy, that that's kind of late in the history of the disease. You have the disease, all these stages, but nobody's treating it, and that's a real problem, so I focused on that, and we as a team, I think, all agreed. So I wrote a book. It's on Amazon. the golden opportunity. The golden opportunity, because we feel, the three of us feel strongly, that we need to diagnose the patients in stage 1, stage 2, or even before that, very early. And that's what this book is all about, and that's really called, you have to get the insulin, serum insulin level. 2-hour glucose tolerance test would do it, and that should be part of routine physicals. We do it all the time, because when you catch them very early, you'll never get the disease. So we call it the golden opportunity. And let's talk about insulin a little bit, which we discussed about running a test for it. But the only job of insulin is not just pushing sugar into the cell. It does a lot of other things also. Would you like to mention a few other things that insulin does besides putting sugar in the cell?
Sure. So one of the important things that insulin does is it actually increases satiety. So it signals the brain that you've eaten and that you're full. And it works in conjunction with the hormone leptin in the brain, and essentially tells your brain about your metabolic rate and your metabolic status. So that's one of the most important things it does. But insulin is a fat storage hormone. Okay,
Right.
It's secreted by the pancreas in response to elevated glucose levels.
Yeah.
And when we were cavemen, and it was feast or famine. When there was food plentifully that was readily available, they would eat, and blood sugar levels would rise. Insulin would be secreted, and then the insulin would cause the excess glucose to be stored as fat, and that would sustain them, for a period of time until they had another meal again. And so insulin is essentially a fat storage hormone. It does that by reducing the blood glucose level, but really that's kind of a side effect of it.
Yeah, hibernating animals, for example. Now we're through this winter. How did they store all this fat to keep themselves alive during the winter? Actually, I was reading that hibernating animals develop insulin resistance, but in the spring they're able to throw the switch and turn it off. Yet us, we are unable to turn that switch, and we keep on. If we're eating excess calories, we'll deposit it. As fat. Very interesting. Other things insulin does, it causes increased cancer rates. And now I begin to read, they're starting to talk about that insulin causes type 3 diabetes. In other words, it affects the cells of your brain. And dementia, they're thinking type 2 diabetics have a high rate of memory loss. People might call it Alzheimer's disease, but a high rate of memory loss. So insulin causes inflammation, increased rates of cancer. It's an anabolic hormone. It makes you fat. If you have a lot of insulin, you're going to have a hard time keeping a normal weight. So that again increases the risk of not getting better. So the better you eat, the less insulin you need. We're all in agreement, I think. With that. But again, the good news is that if you can start eating the right food, get to a normal weight, and there's some people, like I said, who have type 2 diabetes and they even have a normal weight, but if they eat different type of food, the metabolic syndrome may go away and the disease may go away. So we have good news here, and it's important, I think, to get these tests done. Let's speak a little bit. How should a person eat, for example, to avoid, prevent, reverse, or even while we're treating the patient with a type 2 diabetic? What sort of, we're not going to call this a diet, a way of eating. Kathy, how would you tell your patient?
I tell my patients to be mindful of what they eat, and it's true. I think prevention is so important, because at the time of diagnosis with type 2 diabetes, most people have had it for 5 years. So a lot of damage has been going on from excess insulin, high blood sugars, and they're in that stage 4. So by the time we see them and start treatment, they've had a lot of damage. So if we can go to stage 1 or 2 and have people choose healthier foods, and I don't believe one diet, but you want lean protein, lots of vegetables, fruits, whole grains. And it's a learning process, because people are used to eating a certain way. And I think it takes a little bit of time, but not only do we have to tell them to eat healthier, we have to give them choices and options to help them along the way. I think that's important, reading food labels, but I think we have to give options for snacks, for mealtime choices, and maybe work with one meal at a time. Start with breakfast and try to make that healthier.
And make
Can't
a goal.
change overnight.
Yeah, and
Correct.
make a goal. And Dr. Santos, what about the type of food? If you're facing this, you're trying to prevent the disease, you're treating this type 2 diabetic, what kind of way of eating, let's call it that. We're not talking about a diet here. We're talking about a way of eating. What would you say?
I think important for reversal or even during the treatment of diabetes, as far as diet goes, is to try to eat a lower glycemic diet. Okay, so foods that won't drive blood sugar so high. So we always hear of people, in the morning having a big bowl of oatmeal or a big bowl of Cheerios, and their blood sugars go through the roof. But they had been told that whole grains and whole wheat is healthy for them.
Right.
But it's just not the case.
They have to know the sugar content of the food through a glycemic index, which you can get on the computer, glycemicindex.com. It comes from Australia. It's free.
Right.
Tells you the glycemic index of the food you're eating. Explain glycemic load to us a little bit. That's a term we hear today a little bit. Could you explain that a little bit?
The best way to illustrate that is to use the example of a carrot. So a carrot has
I love carrots.
a relatively high glycemic index, and some diabetics are then under the assumption that they can't eat them because they can elevate their blood sugars. However, the glycemic load takes into account the amount of carbohydrate in that food. Okay, and so the glycemic load of carrots is quite low. So you have to eat a lot of them for it to really drive your blood sugars up.
Yeah.
So that's the concept of the glycemic load.
So people should have some idea what the glycemic index of the food they're eating, and let it be a habit. And they probably should get some tables, shouldn't they, to look at?
Sure.
You can get them
and
off
they
the
should
computer.
eat low glycemic index foods based on those tables.
Right, because our enemy is sugar, isn't
Right.
it?
And you want foods that don't make your blood sugar go up, because the higher the blood sugar, the more the insulin. And if you
and that's
can,
the reason we want to learn about what good proteins are. What are good snacks? For example, egg whites, would you consider a good protein to eat? One raise the
Very
blood sugar.
bioavailable protein.
And in meat products, we're not totally against meat products at all, but you got to know where they're from. Make sure they're not from a CAFO farm where they're feeding a lot of corn and oil products and use hormones and pesticides, where 90% of the beef today comes from that. So you must ask, wait, is this organic or not? Is this from these concentrated animal feeding organizations? Because the corn they're feeding these animals is from genetically modified corn, totally different. You couldn't even eat it yourself. So when you eat an animal, actually what you're eating, what that animal ate. It's just like fish. A lot of fish today is from a pond, and these have in them a lot of omega-6s, the pro-inflammatory essential fatty acids, which are not good for you, inflame your whole body. When I look at a 200-pound person, for example, and I'm suspicious they have hyperinsulinemia, number 2 in the 5 stages of diabetes. Their blood sugar may be normal, the HbA1c may be normal, but I look at their body as being inflamed. My God, doctor, why do you see this fire? It's because the insulin level is up, and insulin causes inflammation of your 300,000 miles of capillaries in your body. 60,000 bigger vessels, but 300,000 capillaries there recently. Well, wow. And they're inflamed because of these sugary products. Dr. Furman, who wrote a famous book, and he's a friend of mine, End of Diabetes. My name is back of the book, actually, because I reviewed it for Harper's. He has an excellent table here about understanding the glycemic index, and he has a table and gives a glycemic load. I just read you a couple samples to get some idea. A white potato you think is pretty sugary, but it would be 90 on the glycemic index, but a glycemic load will be 29 because of the fiber and the amount of carbohydrates. Notice, because I love a baked potato, but for diabetic, it's probably, do you allow diabetics to eat baked potato? Not really, huh?
you know, if they're going to eat one, it would have to be small, not all the sour cream and the toppings. You know, that's the problem. They have the potato and say, well, it's a half a potato, but what they put on it.
Yeah, interestingly enough, a watermelon, which we know is pretty sugary, would be 76 in the glycemic index, but the glycemic load would be a 6. So we're not against them, are we? No. And an onion doesn't count. I mean, that has a negative glycemic index. Same with mushrooms, tomatoes, eggplants, cauliflower. Irrelevant. Eat all you want. Eat all you want. So in general, what are we saying? 80% vegetables, 20% protein and fats, sort of like that. Yeah. It needs some animal products, but why are nuts good? Why are nuts good? Ken?
Nuts are a good source of protein, good source of fiber, omega 3s. You have a lot of good nutrients in there.
Yeah.
And I think the current fad is high protein. Everybody wants to eat high protein and low carbohydrate. But I think a lot of people forget that you only need 40 to 50 grams of protein a day. And you can get a lot of that protein from grains, beans, nuts, vegetables. You don't need the animal product to get that protein.
I think it's a great statement. And mainly because most of the animal products we're getting out of ponds and out of CAFOs are just unhealthy. They're just unhealthy. Although we need the protein, the more protein that you eat, and it won't raise the blood sugar. You know what I mean? But we don't need a high protein diet because it's hard on your kidneys, hard on your liver. Tell us a little bit about Dr. Santos and Dr. Paleo about the complications. Why are we so passionate about this? We're passionate for a couple of reasons. We can stop this disease. We can prevent this disease. We want to be known for that because it's true. But we're trying to get you to save you a lot of pain and early death, a lot of complications. What are the complications, the biggest complications of diabetes?
I think, like I mentioned on the previous program, the complications that most people think of from diabetes revolve around cardiovascular disease, so heart attacks and strokes.
If you're type 2 diabetic, you have vascular disease on first diagnosis.
Yeah, there's endothelial dysfunction at some level.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so those are the big things that we think of. But there's also microvascular complications, which can be can cause a lot of suffering for people. And you can speak maybe about those.
The microvascular, all the tiny little vessels and nerve endings and capillaries are affected by high blood sugars. So you think of your eyes, you think of your kidneys.
People go, it's the biggest cause of blindness in the nation, right?
Yes. And kidneys, feet, the neuropathy, they feel the numbness, tingling, burning in their fingers and toes. And not only that, but it causes the intestinal, the GI tract to slow down. So it affects your digestion of your food because you have tiny nerve endings that go there. Yeah,
they go right to the tips of the villi in your, in this peripheral. Remember, I was originally a neurologist and neurosurgeon, so neurology always interested me. Is that a lot of type diabetics would complain of numbness in the hands, numbness in their feet, and as a result of that became easily injured, developed sores in the feet, and that resulted in amputations. I've seen, and you've seen more than I have, people got amputated in the toes, and then the ankle, and then below the knee, and then above the knee, and the death rate, I even hate to tell you, once they amputate a knee, 2 years, lucky to be alive. So prevention is really what we have in mind. And it's a huge cause of heart attacks. And a lot of the heart attacks that come to the emergency room say had no previous history. Almost everyone is a type 2 diabetic. The heart doctors are telling me. And those people should have had on their routine physical the golden opportunity, blood tests, get your yearly blood tests, including the serum insulin, so we catch you early. We're seeing children today with obesity, 6 years old, 10 years old. I even hate to mention, just barely an hour ago while preparing for this lecture, I'm sitting at a fast food restaurant. My friend Dr. Furman calls them fiberless restaurants. I won't name them. And I'm reading, and there's a young boy that I think with grandfather, maybe he was 10, and if what he was eating, he's going to probably be diabetic as a teenager. He was eating nothing but sugar. he was eating nothing but sugar. So a lot of strokes, a lot of heart attacks, peripheral neuropathy, skin diseases, a lot of times type 2 diabetic. Let's talk about exercise a little bit, and then I'm going to get into sugar a little bit, the cause of it. Why is exercise important? Dr. Santos, why should a diabetic, or anybody, frankly, exercise?
Exercise is extremely important. What it does is primarily improve insulin sensitivity. But I think there's a couple types of exercise that we often forget about, and one would be fast burst type exercises, what they call high intensity interval training. And those, it tends to be a shorter workout, but it's more intense, and it actually burns fat better than the whole, running on a treadmill for an hour or jogging on a treadmill for an hour kind of thing. And then resistance training or lightweight training is also really good at building muscle, which helps increase the metabolic rate and helps you to burn fat.
Yeah, I understand. A pound of muscle will burn 50 calories a day without you doing anything. Hey, that's great. Any words you have, Dr. Pelliot?
I always tell people, they always say, well, I can't walk, or I'm in a wheelchair, or I don't have the energy. But there are a lot of things people can do, and I give them ideas. They can sit in a wheelchair or their chair at home, and you can take cans, or you can take a gallon of milk weighs 9 pounds. So you can fill it halfway with water to start, but you can lift. You can lift your knees, you can move your feet. There are several videos on YouTube that show exercises for sitting. You can raise and lower your arms, you can do swimming motions, and that all increases your heart rate, plus there's resistance. But if you give people examples of things to do, they tend to do them. If you just tell them to exercise and they're unable to, then they feel like they are not going to be successful. But if you start them very slowly and the next visit say, well, why didn't you add this? Then they have small steps of success, and it works much better.
I think you explained it in a wonderful way, and I'd like to add to it, Kathy, since you're the Ohio State adult female dancing champion, you can always dance in place.
You can.
Which is a best mental physical exercise. So we don't accept disability, whether you have an amputation, you're sitting in a wheelchair. There are things you can do. Matter of fact, I'll tell you an interesting story about disabled people and exercise. I'm the sponsor of a wheelchair tennis tournament in Fort Wayne every year. Had been for 5 years. Last year, one of the most beautiful days, and it's coming up soon. Maybe I'll invite you to come. Out came last year 38 people, men and women, young and old, sitting in a wheelchair, playing a tennis tournament. Can you imagine coming out like that? And in Turnstone, myself, I give them the money. They give prize money for it.
That's inspirational.
I feel like getting in a wheelchair and see if I can't win it. No, and it's the most beautiful thing. And the most beautiful thing of this was, and I have pictures of them, 38 of them. They gave me as a collage. I'm so proud of it. Every one of these 30 people was in excellent physical shape. And they had been from injuries and born that way, or all sorts of problems. So I'd like to mention another couple of words about, you already mentioned HIIT. I mean, I like the things in exercise. I like to talk about it. Sit, hit, and neat. Hey, wait a minute. You're trying to be funny here, Doc? Well, you mentioned on HIIT, high intensity exercise. I actually do it myself, mainly for teaching purposes, and it's good for my own health. I'll go to work out, and I do 20 minutes and then the weights. Right. But what I do is do a minute of very fast on the treadmill, and then slower, 1 4 miles or 3 miles, and then I just keep right on going that up to 10 minutes. So it's fast, slow, and they have found that's better than running a marathon, because your heart rate goes up and down. It strengthens. Then I go into the elliptical machine. I do 30 seconds of real fast and real slow. I have limits. And then I do another 5 minutes on the bike. Same darn thing, 30 seconds. And I did today actually while I was watching Dr. Oz. Perfect. Learning something at the same time. And then let's talk about that. So we speak about the HIIT. What about the sit? there's such an entity called sitting disease. I didn't know about till recently. I had big audiences the last few weeks giving lectures. Not a person knew about it. I just asked to see. A Dr. Levine from the Mayo Clinic studied for 20 years about people who don't have time to exercise. You know, if you take total calories that we expend, say 60% is your basic metabolic rate, 10% the energy of digestion, and maybe only 10% of the people work out. So you get 30% of calorie burn that occurs from doing the dishes, taking a walk with the dog, or whatever. So we get 30-40% of the calorie burn that we would, and that's the non-exercise activity thermogenics. That's the NEAT. Okay, so we try to tell patients or yourself how to improve your NEAT. In other words, use the stairs instead of the elevator. If you go to a supermarket, walk around once and then shop. Take your dog for a walk. Dance in place. Stand up every time there's a phone call. Stand up. That triples the energy expenditure. Sitting versus when you're using computers. Stand up. Some people even have now, they're selling treadmills where you can use a treadmill while you're working all day. So most Americans suffer from sitting disease. But here's the real point. If you could improve your calorie burn, say 200 calories a day, and kept everything else the same, you would have lost 20 pounds in a year. And I tell you honestly, unless you weigh 300-400 pounds, most people have type 2 diabetes, auf Wiedersehen, it'd be gone. So to pay a lot of attention, and you can Google it to look up and learn about sitting disease and NEAT. Improve your NEAT activity. I highly encourage it. We three of us are really the Three Stooges here. we're working on this, telling people to improve their NEAT activity or use the HIIT. Yeah, I've gotten used to it now. I really enjoy it. You know,
and you have to start slow initially because
you start slow, and you got to check with your doctor if you've had a heart attack. Make sure that you're allowed to do this. But we're not saying you got to do it for 30 minutes.
Right.
You know, we taught say a minute, 30 seconds, even 20 seconds makes a difference. Let's speak about a little bit now about sugar, which we consider to be the enemy, frankly, of good health. I picked up recently a book I recommend that you have a look at too, and Sarah Wilson. I picked it up at Barnes and Noble, and she puts really the problem right at fructose in sugar. We brought that up in the previous show, and I think we are in agreement, the three of us, that's the real enemy. And the reason being, I like to bring it up again, is that table sugar is 50% glucose. What's the other 50%? I presented to an audience of 150 nurses and other providers, some doctors. Hardly anybody knew it. It's not something that's being pushed. I asked a senior medical student that recently. She didn't know it. But that to us is really the crux of fatty liver disease. 25% of Americans have fat in the liver. They don't know it, and it's very dangerous. It causes insulin resistance, leptin resistance, and it causes a great deal of disease. And I'll just go through the metabolism a little bit, no great detail here. Glucose goes to the liver, 20% used up in energy, 20% goes to the brain, the rest goes to our muscles in glycogen, and we use it up. But fructose goes to the bloodstream, doesn't raise the insulin level, goes to the liver, sucks up your energy molecule, ATP, is converted to fat and makes the very low density LDL. That's what goes in your blood vessels and burrows into those little crevices and forms arteriosclerosis and atherosclerosis, the big vessels, and arteriosclerosis, the little vessels, those 300,000 miles we talked about. Is caused by very low density LDL. So what's the enemy that's killing us? Fat? No, it's not fat. It's not the majority of the cholesterol. It's the very low density LDL, the VLDL, the very low one that's killing us. And what's doing it is fructose. So Sarah Wilson wrote this book, I Quit Sugar. And if you read it, right in the beginning of the book, she totally agrees with what we've been teaching. She put it right on fructose, and she has wonderful recipes in there on the weight eating, because it's easy to say what we're saying, but how do you change? How do you change? We didn't say diet. You got to eat different food, but you need some recipes, and the three of us are committed to the next few shows. We're going to bring some food here out of this recipe book, because that in the end is the answer. And what we've been speaking about here really is just a different way of eating. And Dr. Furman, end of diabetes, he says if you eat this way we've been speaking about, that you'll have your blood sugar you'll not have the ups and downs. And see if you agree. He says you can probably reduce your medication within a couple of weeks about 50%. He thinks you can get rid of insulin within a few weeks. Would you believe that? Would you believe that? Remember what all insulin does? Anabolic hormone, makes you fat, it inflames your body, it causes dementia, it causes arteriosclerosis, it also causes arthritis. That's why a lot of type 2 diabetics have severe arthritis, need hip and knee replaced. They think it's from the weight. No, it's because insulin deposited at these ages and inflamed the joints, and that's the cause of the majority of these amputations. So if you get rid of your type 2 diabetes, which we think you get a 90% chance of happening, the arthritis rate would go way down. And also, besides, if you eat this way, you'll have if you're looking for a decent figure and you want to look good as far as you're concerned, although being overweight, you can be beautiful. That's not the point. There's a significant number of people, maybe 20%, who are overweight, have normal blood work, and they're physically fit. Let's not forget that. So this is a no judgment zone here, right. And we'd all agree with that. Not everybody overweight has abnormal blood studies,
right.
But they need to have them a check, and they'd have a normal lifespan. And how many years do you think a type 2 diabetic with the complications, how many years do you think they cut off from their life, Dr. Santis?
I don't know. The different studies have said anywhere from about 8 years or so.
8 to 10 years,
yeah.
yes.
And probably you add another 15 of misery,
right.
Of amputations, biggest cause of renal transplants, and complications and unhappy, unfulfilling.
That's why I think
life.
your book is so good, The Golden Opportunity. I think a lot of people aren't aware that when you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, you've lost 50% of the function of that pancreas. And you are in that stage 4. So if you can prevent stage 1, the insulin resistance, or reverse by not eating high sugar foods, and prevent before you even have to treat and reverse it. So I think it's very important.
I thank you for bringing it back up again, because that's not just a minor point, that's a huge point. I mean, when you think of all the complications of diabetes, the heart attacks, the strokes, the nursing homes, the loss of jobs, the medications, everything, that's the biggest cause of our cost of medical care. I don't think I'm exaggerating by saying we spend almost $3 trillion a year in medical care. I think we could, if people were tested very early, and we get a 90% compliance rate, that we can save $1 trillion. Right.
And I think the bottom line is what we eat and what we do, how active we are, but it's always the hardest choice. People have patterns, they have habits, and I think it's our duty to educate them and give them ideas, or have them try to come up with ideas, maybe work with one meal at a time. But if we don't teach them how, then I think they're lost. But I think that's the place to start, is the food choices and being mindful and just being more active. I never say diet and exercise, because they already shut the brain off for the rest of the conversation. I just tell them to be more mindful of what they eat and be more active. And like you said, simple things: parking in the back of the parking lot, walking, standing more at home instead of sitting. Simple things. It really is simple. Yeah,
I like your words, Dr. Pillar, because this is, and would you agree, Dr. Sanders, this is really not complex. And I mean,
it doesn't have to be. It's just a matter of education.
I also, with a neurologist and neurosurgeon like me, we understand this all. This is not my field, but I tell you, for for 44 years, which I practiced in neurosurgery, I was seeing so many type 2 diabetics as being a bigger problem than what they were seeing me about, that it motivated me.
Right.
I started reading about it, and now I frankly know an awful lot about it. I think I personally probably stopped and prevented about 200 people at least, because I go to Starbucks, somebody walk up to me and says, "Doc, I no longer have my diabetes," because they saw it on TV. I saw a black gentleman the other day at the Indiana Tech where the speech was going on. He was sort of the doorman, and he said his type 2 diabetes was gone. He lost 30 pounds, and it was gone. And he was watching our Access TV show all the time. I don't blame him. Yeah. So you can't believe what you did for us. You know what I mean? And he brought his diabetic friends there to watch the show.
Yeah, it's a matter of education. The science behind diabetes is extremely complex, but actually the process of reversing the diabetes is not complex. It's very simple, straightforward strategies.
It's about 5 different things at best. You know, if you just start with eating a nutrient-dense, half a plate of vegetables, another quarter of maybe some complex vegetables, some root vegetables, another quarter some nuts, some good protein meats, some protein substitutes. Even now, they're starting to come out with vegetarian meat substitutes. I was reading about them. Matter of fact, it happened to Whole Foods, where they had both in the store. They accidentally mixed them up. I was reading in the paper, and they had to tell the people who bought it, and I'll tell you the reason in a minute. Not a single person called up and said that was fake meat. Not a one. But they had to call them because they used different substances and they could have been allergic. Sure. So they had announced it to the public. Wasn't that interesting? I think it's coming down the line where we're going to have a substitute meat that tastes exactly the same. It tastes the same as chicken, the same as beef, and they're made from vegetables. And how much more healthier that is, and humane. I'm a little upset what they do to animals. That may not upset another person, but it does upset me. And in some, let's speak a little bit about there are certain ethnic and racial groups that have this more commonly, don't they?
Yes.
Kathy?
African American, Hispanic, the Pima Indians have the highest rate here in the United States. And if you look at what they eat, I have even Asian population, but it's a lot of rice and it's a lot of flour products, tortillas, and that's their culture and that's what they choose to eat, but they can still make those choices healthier.
Yeah, it is our job. That's what we're trying to do. It's a medical professor's job to teach the patient and have them come back frequently. We don't blame the public. But it needs to be taught at the medical school level too, though, that they need to come screaming out of medical school as being preventative doctors. That this is important, very, very important. Physician means teacher, and that's what we're trying to do. Let's speak about cancer a little bit too. I just gave a talk all week long to cancer nurses. It was about stress, but I also took a survey while I was there, what the percent of the cancers they thought were related to habits, what we eat, for example. Smoking, we know that one, obviously. But a great deal. I didn't realize till reading that 82% of pancreatic cancer is related to insulin. Wow! That's a nasty cancer to begin with. And so people with insulin resistance are much more likely to have the pancreatic cancer.
Diabetics are higher risk for pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, yeah. And you concur on that? Yeah, sure. I didn't realize that high. And a lot of these ovarian cancer are related to being overweight, obese, and probably it's the insulin that affects the cancer cell. Cancer, incidentally, is a sugar feeder. Yeah. So the nutrient-dense way of eating, if that's enough for a cancer patient, is pretty important.
And they've done studies showing that people that drink regular soda, sugar-sweetened soda, actually have high rates of pancreatic cancer.
Is that right?
I have a lot of patients that are diabetic that are drinking soda, and that's just one of those things that has to be completely eliminated. It cannot be included as part of moderation in their diet. It just cannot.
Yeah, yeah. And the sugar, again, is really the enemy, and especially fructose corn syrup. But people don't realize the difference between the glycemic index of a regular sugar and high fructose corn syrup isn't that much, except fructose corn syrup is a lot more inflammatory. It causes inflammation of the liver, much more commonly cause advanced glycation products where they combine with sugar and protein in the blood, deposit in the brain, cause cancer, inflammation all over the body, and also increases insulin, increased colorectal cancer too, 30% increase in that. So, and these cancer nurses, they agreed. They thought 50 to 75% of cancer was related to habits, like smoking and sunshine and what we eat. Yeah, they all were in agreement with that. So something for people to keep in mind. Actually, that's a project for one of my next books is habits and cancer. Well, that's something you can prevent, you know what I mean? And it don't cost a lot. And it makes you very healthy in the process. Let's speak about management of type 1 diabetics a little bit, because I see a significant number of them which are actually overweight, which you wouldn't expect. And my observation would be, see what you think, is that they will then require higher insulin, and insulin is an anabolic hormone, makes them overweight yet, so their regulation of the sugar is even worse. So even the type 1 diabetic should be very careful what they eat. I knew a doctor in town here, I think he was a pediatrician, who I think he lived to be 100. He was type 1 diabetic since age 6, but he ate a perfect way. Always did. Was proud of it. He looked great. So what I'm saying is, I want to see if you would agree or not, the majority of type 1 diabetics, if they're careful, you know, the exercise and what they eat, could almost lead a normal lifespan. Is that true?
Yes. I have many patients that have had type 1 diabetes 50, 60 years, and we're planning a special program at the end of the summer to honor them. And probably 90% of my patients that have had success with minimal complications, weight gain, their blood sugars have been stable. When I say, why do you think this happened? And 90% go back to their mothers, because their mothers controlled their food intake and educated them and taught them how to eat small portions, low sugar. So they developed really good habits in the very beginning years. And now many of them have excellent glycemic control, very little weight gain, very few complications in their 90s. And they maybe developed diabetes at age 7 or 10. So, and in their teen years, and it's amazing, there is still a small group, but it's activity and food choices. So it still goes back to that.
Let's face it, Dr. Santis, those are beautiful words.
Yeah, that's amazing.
As a matter of fact, I ran across another nurse that works with Carol Burns today. She was telling me about an event. Please, do not forget to invite me.
Oh, don't worry.
And we want to get their personal histories.
Yes.
Because we could put them together and throw them in a book.
Right.
Because that'd be very motivating. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Tell them to come with a one-page thing telling us how they did it, and that you give credit to mothers is wonderful, because I'm sort of in the process being a book on children and eating and the obesity problem. In one book I was reading, that the most important thing with children, even more than the type of food, is for the family to sit together when they have a meal. Yes. And that person didn't emphasize even the food so much. The family meal, where you can teach kids that and deal with their stresses and then insert, you know, don't let them choose your food. You choose it for them. And no arguments about it. They get to be a habit. And that was fascinating. You said that about the mothers.
And I think it's harder today with so many electronic, the equipment that we have, everybody's working, both parents work. In those days, the mother stayed home and cooked, and we didn't have the choices we have. But, you know, everybody's eating on the run. They're going through fast food. They very seldom sit together. And the children aren't as active. So I think it's harder today.
That you mentioned the internet, because the name of the children's book, I was going to say, Addicting Our Children to Sugar and the Internet. So they were the name of the book.
Yes, I think it's very hard today.
You didn't know about it either. That was just just great. So let's summarize a little bit here, our steps. And people need to, frankly, understand, I think number one is in this prevention and treatment is we want to diagnose people early, right? And to get probably yearly blood tests. And I'm suggesting as a teenager, even a skinny teenager. Would you agree with that? I mean, you don't even know what their blood work is. We don't know. They could have metabolic syndrome and don't know it. And yet, you know, they're burning their calories off and they seem thin, but underneath their serum insulin is elevated. I mean, and it's significant kids that they don't see it. The family doesn't see it. So don't just throw it off on genetics. But I'm thinking genetics, we all have certain genetics, but food, as Dr. Robert Lustig would say in his book, Fat Chance, food is genetic information. It reacts to our gene structure. And the genetic information that we see in Asians, South Americans, and African population, they survived. They survived in evolution because they were able to store fat. Other people died. They lived. So they have, it's called a thrifty genes. They still got it. So now when they eat this fat, the sad American diet, that genetic information, the food, is reacting to their genetic structure. And that's why they have very high rates of type 2 diabetes, vascular disease, and it's an epidemic throughout the world. And we need to teach people that. Nothing derogatory about it, but you know, that's health information. And we spoke about metabolic syndrome as being diagnosed early as being pre-stage. People have pre-diabetes 5 to 15 to 20 years. Their whole body's inflamed. They're looking pretty good. A little bit overweight. Sometimes only 10 pounds. It doesn't take a lot. 5 pounds overweight, you can at the beginning of diabetes. I was reading that. It doesn't let you. It's 100 pounds, so it's 50 pounds, and so blood testing, I think, is critical. You know, when we spoke about the sugar, I forgot to throw this in, which kind of interests me. The chemical formula of glucose, fructose, is the same, C6H12O6. It's exactly the same. That's kind of interesting. So how does the body distinguish the two? And why it reacts so differently? Because they configure it differently. One's a pentagon, one's a hexagon, and the carbon, hydrogen ions, O2 ions, those arms sticking up out of those a little bit different. So sugar, I mean, is not particularly friendly, but fructose is toxic. So the last book I'm working on is called Fructose, the Evil Twin. Now, isn't it an evil twin? There's a little humor here. But it's interesting that Sarah Wilson starts out with that when she's explaining this as fructose is the enemy of the type 2 diabetes thing. It's very interesting. And I hope you watch some of our other shows. I mean, we are committed to prevent it, treat it, reverse it, and come see these good doctors here who are specialists in this at the Lutheran Health Network. And we have to compliment them for having such good people there. And we sort of turning this, frankly, into our mission, into our mission. So besides early diagnosis, which we could then act on, but the people must participate in your health care. I mean, that's the biggest point. We're not going to get anything done, but it's our job to try to motivate you. But if you don't help us, what we like to get away from is ill to the pill. We like to, from the ill to prevention. So we don't have you to take all these medications. 85-year-old patients I see today on 15 medications. That's not good for you. But some of these are very good. Obviously, insulin was a great discovery. Some of these oral medications. Anything you'd like to tell us about medications you use most commonly in the type 2 diabetic? What's the most common?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a time and a place for the use of medications and treatment of diabetes. And sometimes we can use certain types of injectable or oral medications in order to get people off of insulin. Because
Yeah.
ideally, that's the goal you should have, is try to get them off
Yeah.
of insulin.
Get them down to the point as what they need. Medication is life-saving.
Right.
My gosh, we want to compliment the pharmaceutical industry.
And so much has changed in
yeah.
the world of diabetes medications in the
Yes.
past 10 years. And so
Yeah.
we have a lot of medications that work through varying mechanisms in order to improve
Yeah.
the disease state and
Yeah.
reduce the risk of complications.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. So there's injectable therapies that use a hormone called GLP-1,
Yeah.
and those are extremely effective and can control primarily the blood sugar response after meals. So we use those a lot of times. And there's other oral therapies as well.
Where does
like
it act in the liver? Or?
the GLP-1
GLP-1,
agent.
yeah.
So it's going to help the pancreas to make insulin in a glucose-dependent fashion. So when
I
the blood
see.
sugar rises and the pancreas needs
Yeah.
to make more insulin, this molecule will help the pancreas to make that. And then, but it does other things as well.
Yeah.
It'll also tell the liver to shut off production of sugar, and so that'll help the whole glycemic response as well. And in addition, it also works at the level of the brain to reduce the appetite, and people tend to lose weight on the medication.
Sounds like a pretty good drug to me. Yeah. But our point is, so we try those other things first to get it at a certain level where what you absolutely need. I mean, it's
and there's a time and a place to use insulin.
Yeah, absolutely.
We know insulin
Yeah.
works at lowering blood sugars.
Yeah.
The higher the insulin level, the more
Yeah.
the negative effect it has on the body.
Yeah.
But so we try to reduce insulin levels when we can.
Yeah.
But some people need initially a larger dose of insulin in order to overcome the glucose toxicity to their bodies. And so alleviating that glucose toxicity will allow oral medications to work better and their diet to be more effective.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a wonderful discovery of Banting and Best in 1920, and I guess they had dogs that they noticed the ants were eating the urine, and because it had sugar in it.
Right.
It had sugar in it.
But that discovery saved millions of lives.
Oh, people
Yes.
before that time, they were just laying
Emaciated,
intensive care and
right.
emaciated. And I was reading the story. They had a whole ward full of unconscious young people, and they went by and injected them with the extract that they were getting from pigs, and the people, as they walked around the ward, they just woke up. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean,
Yeah, the pictures are dramatic, but
Yes.
before and after. Yeah.
yeah. And we're going to continue these shows for probably maybe all year long, trying to wake up the whole community. We'll take a guess. How many type 2 diabetics do you think live in this city, county? 300,000 people. How many do you think do we have here?
I would guess 25,000.
Probably
Yeah, at least.
quite a bit.
Oh, that's a
That
war.
know 25,000 who know.
Right.
Who knows?
There are
That's
so
the
many
big
that
thing.
are unaware.
How about me putting a guess in there? 25,000 who know, another 25,000 who don't know.
Right.
Correct.
And
I
we can
think
wake them up.
the bottom of the iceberg is much larger than
Yeah.
the tip. So if
Yeah.
we can reach
I mean,
them,
it's bigger than any war we're involved in, and we should really make it a big.
There's over 70 million diabetics and pre-diabetics together in
Yeah.
the United States. It's
Yeah.
a staggering number. It's unfathomable.
Yeah,
almost.
I've heard figures even bigger than that. When you look at the world, it's really rampant in Saudi Arabia right now.
yes, Africa,
Because
China,
they're
India.
having sitting disease
Yeah.
with the.
Nations that
yeah.
didn't have type 2 diabetes
Right.
previously, now
Yeah.
it's becoming an epidemic. Like look at China, for example.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think part of it is related to maybe to wheat too a little bit. It's been changed, and let's face it,
Definitely.
when wheat finally breaks down, it ends up being a sugar.
So the original wheat was
Yeah.
is known by the Italian name of farro, Farro, but it's
Yeah.
einkorn wheat,
Yeah.
and that's the wheat of our ancestors that was around, about 2,000-3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But that type of wheat is dramatically different than what we have today. The wheat we have today is genetically modified. The old wheat, the einkorn wheat, still has gluten, which can be problematic for those with celiac disease, but it doesn't have as dramatic of an effect on blood sugars.
Yeah.
So if you can find einkorn flour and einkorn wheat,
Yeah.
they have this locally at Three Rivers Co-op. You can find it, and it's not something that you should use a lot. But occasionally
You did
it's
find
something
it,
that
huh?
could be helpful. Yeah.
I actually sent for an internet company to get, I think, 5 pounds of it or something, and I was thinking of planting it, but I think I'm going to give it to you to plant.
That's right.
That's no, yeah.
I'll put it in my organic
It's-
garden.
Yeah, I mean, the einkorn wheat had maybe 12 chromosomes, and today, you know, it was genetically modified in the Rockefeller Institute in Mexico City in 1948, and wheat, which used to be, you know, this tall, now it's this tall, total, and it was never tested
That's
on
right.
humans. So our bodies, again, food is genetic information, and we are reacting to it, the people, the patients who have problems with gluten sensitivity, which is 7 times more common than celiac disease, that's 1 in 133. Gluten sensitivity is 7 times more common. They actually run a pretty good type 2 diabetic rate, a much higher. So if you have type 2 diabetes, to run a gluten test on them, not a bad idea.
Well, Dr. Davis in his book Wheat Belly, which we mentioned before, he mentions that 2 slices of whole wheat bread will raise your blood sugar more than 2 tablespoons of sugar.
Yeah.
And that's amazing because we're always told that whole wheat is healthy.
It's healthy.
Yeah.
But not necessarily.
Yeah. Kathy, give us a little more of a lesson in reading labels. This is more, I think women do that more commonly than men. We all need to do it. I don't always look at labels. Do you pay a lot of attention to it?
I pay a lot of attention, and I have my patients learn to read. They need to look at not only, they all look at the sugar content, but you need to look at the fiber, the protein, carbohydrates. You need the whole picture. They get all upset with one ingredient, but it's really a combination of ingredients.
Yeah.
And especially the sodium. I think that surprises them. But they learn so much when they do that.
Yeah. If you're diabetic, you just absolutely must participate in your health care. You've got to learn to read labels and to pay attention.
And we have to educate them on how to read the label.
Yeah, yes,
And that makes a
that's our
difference.
job, and that's not, and it's not always that easy. You know what I mean? I mean, the first product on reading labels is the one that's most commonly in the food, correct? And sugar will go into a lot of phony names. You know, maltose, ribose, dextrose, and the other
brown rice syrup.
Yeah.
Cane sugar.
Yeah, and people say, you know, honey is a good sugar. Well, I hate to tell you, it's 60% fructose. And Dr. Oz had it on the other day.
Yes, he did. I saw that.
Did you see
I
that?
happened to disagree with him.
26, 16, and the teaspoonful of sugar versus honey. You saw that.
He says
too.
that honey is sweeter, so you end up using less, so you save some calories. But there's a lot of fructose in honey, so you can't. I mean, you might be able to use it in small quantities. But.
Yeah, and he forgot to mention that if you're going to use something that's sweeter, you're getting the habit of using something sweeter.
And I think if you can eat the food in its most natural form, anything in a box, a bag, a can, you have to be careful. But if you can eat fresh vegetables, frozen vegetables even are better than canned, then you don't have to be as concerned.
Shop the perimeter of the grocery store, right?
Yeah, organic shopping is the best. You want to eat 80% vegetables and not totally avoid animal products, but be careful what you're eating. Where
you mentioned organic, but there's a list online. You can find it. It's the Dirty Dozen.
Is that right?
And you can also you can find the fruits and vegetables that have the highest amount of pesticides, and then you can find those that are conventionally grown that you don't have to buy organic because they're not heavily sprayed. So I would encourage people to go out and look those up.
And eat foods of color. Eat the rainbow, as Dr. Furman would say. Eat the rainbow, but you can add mushrooms and onions. They don't have color, but they're full of phytochemicals. You want foods that have a lot of vitamins, that's 14 of them, minerals, that's 16 of them, and 25,000 phytochemicals. Those are the lycopenes, the leucines, the carotenes, the enzymes that are in foods of color, which run the metabolic activity of your body as being extremely healthy. And Dr. Furman would call his way of eating the nutritarian way of eating. Well, he's got a point. I mean, you know what I mean? You want to eat food with a lot of nutrients in it. But we're not saying to be vegetarian and avoid meat. We're not saying that at all. Just have knowledge of and reading the labels and learn to shop in the fresh market and teach your children how to eat. Have them at the table for breakfast. You can't, some of us are so busy we can't do it, but that's important. And you should know what they're feeding the child in the schools. Go find out what are they feeding your kid. And because you could be eating a lot of sugary product and you're not aware of it. Kids do that, and have a snack ready, a good snack, a few nuts, for example. Maybe a piece of cheese, not a horrible amount of cheese, but some cheese I think would be okay. So thanks very much for watching our show. And if you think we're passionate about it, you're right, because we know, and we have. We can help a lot of people, and I really appreciate Dr. Santis and Dr. Pellew for being here with the show. We are the three musketeers of preventing diabetes and curing the disease. We love you all. Thank you very much for attending our show, and we'll see you next time. And we'll be on channel 57, 9 o'clock on Wednesday. Namaste. We appreciate you watching us.